Hello, I'm Brian Fox. Welcome to my channel. I hate rock music. And today I want to do a little discussion about Bob Dylan and Rick Rubin. And I've seen a lot of people in social media threads talking about the same question I bring up, which is why doesn't Bob Dylan record with producer Rick Rubin? It would seem to be a natural fit. And of course, the reason being that Rick Rubin essentially revived Johnny Cash's career in his last decade on Earth, somewhere around a decade, and put out a series on the American Records label, a whole bunch of Johnny Cash stuff, and he just did a wonderful job. Rick Rubin did. First of all, the production is first class, and then he picked a lot of really unusual covers for Johnny Cash to do, including Soundgarden's Rusty Cage and the Beatles' "If I Fell," and Nine Inch Nails' "Hurt." He does an incredible version of Nine Inch Nails' "Hurt," and so I just really love the imagination that Rick Rubin used in picking covers, and a lot of contemporary stuff, and then of course bringing in a stellar batch of contemporary musicians to contribute to all these recordings. And a lot of them are very stripped down, but a lot of times I think Rick Rubin picked really great, subtle, tasteful accompaniment to a lot of these songs by Johnny Cash, including a little dash of cello there and dobro and pedal steel, and just really nice settings for a lot of these songs, including a lot of work, of course, where it was just Johnny Cash and his guitar. So the whole idea is that Rick Rubin could do the same thing for Bob Dylan, and I think it has a lot of appeal. So the second part of the discussion, of course, is the fact that apparently Bob Dylan was not impressed with the Johnny Cash work with Rick Rubin, and I think he didn't like the adapting Johnny Cash adapting and using a lot of these new songs and reinterpreting them. And I think he felt like it was manufactured in some ways. And I think he likes the purity of Johnny Cash's own work, where he's got his own band. And so apparently he's disappointed in that and doesn't really want to work with Rick Rubin and hasn't expressed any interest in working with Rick Rubin. But the third part of my argument or discussion here is the fact that I don't really grip Bob Dylan's issues with the Rick Rubin recordings because, first of all, Bob Dylan, of course, has worked with a number of producers who have a heavy footprint. The "Oh Mercy" album by Daniel Lanois is a great example. I mean, that's Daniel Lanois all over that record, and Dylan really fit in very nicely with it. And I think Daniel Lanois made some great choices making that record. And the other thing, of course, is Bob Dylan shouldn't really have any objections to cover songs, including contemporary ones, because Bob Dylan, of course, has a long history of doing other people's songs. And also, Johnny Cash, in his vast catalog, has done an astonishing number of covers. And a lot of them are pretty bombastic and overproduced and syrupy. And so this new version of Johnny Cash fits in pretty well with his career. And then I think since Dylan is used to doing covers, the idea of having Rick Rubin pick out cover songs that Dylan can do is not a bad idea. I know Dylan likes to control his sessions and what songs he does, but kind of like with the Johnny Cash sessions, they recorded a ton of stuff, and there's enough stuff recorded to fill up 5 albums or so. And then there's a box set called Unearthed that has 4 more CDs of cover songs that weren't included in the original records. So Rick Rubin basically recorded a ton of stuff, and they used about half of it. And so Dylan could have the choice of if he enjoyed the way the cover versions turned out, he could keep them, and if he didn't, they could dismiss them. And needless to say, there's a lot of great covers that Dylan would sound great on that Rick Rubin could choose. And of course, Bob Dylan did the Self Portrait album, and there's a ton of covers on there, and some of them are pretty unusual picks. So it wouldn't be out of character for Bob Dylan to do this. And then the other thing is, I think that Rick Rubin's sensitivity and good taste about what kind of backup to have on each song would really serve Bob Dylan well. I would love to hear a lot of the material that Rick Rubin did actually with Johnny Cash would sound really incredible with Bob Dylan on it. So I just don't understand the objection. And then, of course, the bottom line is this whole idea that, well, maybe Bob Dylan doesn't want to work with Rick Rubin because it's a sign that you're having your last days on earth and that your old career is over. And that's certainly not the case with Bob Dylan, but maybe it's just an omen. And then one of the other things that appears in the threads that I totally understand is the fact that Bob Dylan has made a number of albums that are kind of like what Rick Rubin would do with them. Um, World Gone Wrong, perfect example, just Bob Dylan and his guitar and harmonica doing a bunch of cover songs, and Dylan and a lot of Time Out of Mind is another one where that sounds like something Rick Rubin could have produced. It has a very modern sound to it, and it's a great vehicle for Dylan. And so, in a lot of ways, Bob Dylan doesn't really need Rick Rubin to reinvent Bob Dylan. But that said, as I say, when I've been taking a deep dive into all the Johnny Cash recordings that Rick Rubin did, and boy, I'll tell you what, to me it sounds like it would be a great combination with Bob Dylan. It'd be very fruitful, and I'm sure if he went in the studio with Rick Rubin, they'd probably come out 10 years later with 100 songs, and they would all sound wonderful. So that's my two bits on the continuing discussion about Bob Dylan working with Rick Rubin. And I think I'll speculate some more on who Bob Dylan should work with at this point because it's a fun exercise. But I don't want to rule out the fact that someday Bob Dylan may end up with recording with Rick Rubin, and I'm sure the results would be spectacular. So thanks for indulging me in this discussion. I'm Brian Fox. Thanks for watching I Hate Rock Music.